The stretch of coastline in Normandy that later became known as Utah Beach houses dozens of strongpoints and resistance nests, most of which are completely unheard of. 20 kilometers to the northwest of Utah Beach Museum, hidden down a country lane, is Resistance Nest 25. It was built on the site of an old French fort that once protected the coastline from the English. As I've shown you before, the Germans reused many of these locations. It housed not only impressive firepower, but some very unique features that even I have never seen before. Now I've whet your appetite and hopefully given you cause to subscribe, I wanted to head away from WN25 to show you a very interesting casemate that actually protects the road heading towards WN25. But worry not, I'll be covering WN25 very soon. Situated 500 meters inland from Resistance Nest 25, in the small hamlet of Beauvais, is Resistance Nest 140, a single Type R680 casemate that once housed a PaK-40 7.5cm anti-tank gun. It covered the southern approach to not only WN25 but several other bunker complexes further to the north. I mentioned that this is an R680 casemate, and as you can see it has straight sides and sharp corners. For a comparison, here is another R680 on the island of Tattahoo a few miles away, with a more rounded design that we're used to. So why the different design? Well, its purpose supposedly helps it blend in more effectively within a built-up area, whereas casemates with more rounded features were field bunkers designed to be hidden. In reality, Allied aircrews were very good at spotting even the smallest of German positions, and this casemate does seem to have had a crisis of identity. As I mentioned, it was designed to blend in, and the camouflage design was done to mimic stone buildings, although it is far too coarse a pattern to be believable. Then there's its blast wall that protected it from fire coming from the direction of the sea. Although it's smaller than usual, it would have still been a dead giveaway to an experienced spotter. If that wasn't enough, it clearly had soil banked up around it, evidenced by the staining of the concrete and the lack of the camouflage pattern lower down. This would have given it an abnormal visible height for this size of building. If you look closely around the top of its walls, it also has pigtails to attach camouflage nets that would distort its shape. So what does it identify as? A building designed to blend in, or a casemate to be hidden by banks of soil and camo nets? What is really cool is if you look closely, you can still see the detail left behind by what looks like twisted cloth that was applied to the inside of the shuttering before the concrete was poured. I've shown you this before at Asville and Crisbeck amongst others, and rope is usually used, not what appears to be cloth. As I mentioned, an R680 casemate was specifically designed to take the 7.5cm PaK-40 anti-tank gun that was also fitted to tanks and tank destroyers in a slightly modified form. It entered service in 1942 with around 27,000 produced during the course of the war. It was one of Germany's main anti-tank guns, and it could fire around 14 rounds a minute out to around 1,800 meters in direct fire use, but it could reach almost 8,000 meters when used for indirect fire with a high explosive round. It was a formidable weapon that was capable of penetrating up to 80mm of armor, sloped at 30 degrees at a range of 1,500 meters, 100mm at 1,000 meters, 120 at 500, and 143 at 100, rendering all Allied armour vulnerable. The gun was to be rolled in from the rear of the casemate through two armoured doors that are no longer present, past ammunition niches on either side, up two ramps to raise it to the desired height, and the wheels would then rest in two depressions in the concrete. The trailing arms would then lock into the guide tracks either side behind the gun. Stationary, the PaK-40 could only traverse 65 degrees, but with the tracks built into the floor, it could traverse up to 120 degrees in an R680, almost doubling its arc of fire. When the gun was fired, it would fill the room with unpleasant gases, and with most casemates being sealed, save the gun opening, the gases would collect inside. Directly above the breech of the gun is a series of louvers, once covered by mesh. These were connected to pipes set into the concrete at the time of its construction. Looking past the clutter that I'm fairly certain is post-World War II, is a large extractor fan that is usually taken for scrap, but minus the motor is still present at WN140. This would then suck these gases out of the room and blow them out of a vent to the right of the main entrance. The vent is covered to protect it from attack such as explosives or grenades. This example is covered by a fine mesh, but is usually covered by a much more armoured grate. The purpose of the louvers above the gun is to extract the fumes as evenly as possible. The extract fan would actually require electricity from elsewhere, as there is no allowance for a generator in the casemate, so either a field generator or it was taken from a nearby house. Overall, this casemate is very interesting for several reasons, and if you're passing, there is a public car park right next to it, so visiting is very easy.